I pulled into my driveway on a Friday evening, the kind of evening where the sky turns that deep amber color and everything looks a little more peaceful than it actually is. My sister Ruth's birthday had been a good week. 7 days in Savannah, eating shrimp and grits, watching her grandkids tear around the backyard, sleeping in a guest room that smelled like lavender and clean laundry. I hadn't realized how much I needed it until I was already there. But by Thursday night, I was ready to come home. I'm a homebody at heart, always have been. My house in Clarksville, Tennessee, is not just where I live. It is where I breathe. It is where I breathe. 31 years my wife Donna and I spent building that place into something real. The garden out back, the workshop in the garage. The kitchen she repainted twice before she found the exact shade of yellow she wanted. She passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and merciless. The house is all I have left of her. So, when I turned onto my street that Friday evening and saw a second car in my driveway, a car I didn't recognize, I told myself it was nothing. Emma's friends were always coming and going. My daughter was social that way. But then I saw the boxes, stacked on my front porch. 8, maybe 10 of them. And not moving boxes you buy at U-Haul. Furniture boxes. The kind that hold bed frames and dressers and the contents of someone else's entire life. I sat in my truck for a long moment with the engine running. My hands were still on the wheel. I told myself there was an explanation. Maybe Emma was helping a friend store some things temporarily. Maybe there had been a mix-up. That my mind ran through every reasonable possibility because the unreasonable ones were still too strange to hold. I turned off the engine and stepped out. The front door was propped open with a brick. My brick. The decorative one Donna had painted with a little red cardinal that she kept by the flower bed. Propped against my front door like a doorstop. I walked up the porch steps and the first thing I heard was voices. Not Emma's voice. Other voices. A man laughing too loudly. A television I didn't own playing something I didn't recognize. I stepped through the door and into my own living room and I stopped walking because what I saw did not make sense. My armchair, the brown leather one I've had for 20 years, was pushed into the corner at an angle like someone had shoved it aside to make room. In its place was a sectional sofa I had never seen in my life, enormous and beige, taking up half the room. On it sat a woman I recognized and one I did not. The woman I recognized was my daughter-in-law's mother, Renata. The woman I did not recognize was young, maybe 20, with earbuds in, scrolling her phone. She didn't look up. Renata did look up. She looked right at me, and then she looked back at the television. I stood there in my own living room feeling like a man who has walked into the wrong house and can't quite bring himself to admit it. The air smelled like a candle I didn't own and underneath that, cigarette smoke. Nobody in my house smokes. Nobody in my house has ever smoked. Donna had allergies. 9. Renata, I said. She reached for the remote and turned the volume down, just slightly. Oh, Ray, she said, as though she had been expecting me to show up eventually but hadn't planned around it. Emma said you'd be back today. Emma. Where is Emma? I asked. Kitchen, I think. She turned the volume back up. I walked into the kitchen. Emma was there, standing at the counter, her back to me. She was transferring things from a cardboard box into my cabinets. Not her things. Someone else's things. Emma. Mismatched mugs. A set of dishes with a flower pattern that had never been anywhere near this house. Emma, I said. She turned around and the expression on her face was the one I remembered from when she was 16 and had borrowed my truck without asking. Not guilt exactly. More like the careful, managed version of guilt. End quote. The version that has already prepared its defense. Dad, she said, you're home. I am, I said. What is happening in my house? She set down the mug she was holding. She had practiced this, I could tell. Her hands were steady and her voice was measured. Brandon's parents lost their apartment, she said. The building sold and the new owner raised the rent and they just couldn't make it work. They needed somewhere to go and we couldn't exactly say no. It's just temporary. Brandon is my son-in-law. He and Emma have been married 3 years. He is not a bad man, but he is a man who says yes to things before he thinks about what saying yes means. I had noticed that about him early on. They I said. Who is they? His mom and dad, she said, and then, quieter, and his sister Kayla. How long have they been here? 4 days. I had been gone 7 days. They had moved in halfway through my trip. Where did you put my things? I asked, because the kitchen felt wrong, too full of strangers' objects, and I needed to check. Your room is fine, she said quickly. Everything in your room is fine. I walked down the hallway. The door to my workshop, the converted garage I accessed through a door off the hall, was closed. I opened it. I want you to understand something about that workshop. 30 years ago, I built a workbench along the back wall from reclaimed oak I pulled out of a demolished schoolhouse. Donna said it was excessive. I said it was a piece of history. End quote. Every tool on that wall had a specific hook, a specific purpose, and a specific story. The Japanese hand plane I saved up for 18 months to buy. The set of chisels that had belonged to my own father. The router table I built from a kit on our first anniversary while Donna laughed at me for calling it a romantic weekend project. I opened that door, and I stood there. The workbench was still there, but every hook on the wall was empty. My tools were gone. In their place, stacked in careful rows, along the wall, were storage bins. Include plastic containers with clip lids, labeled in a handwriting I didn't know. Linens, kitchen mist, winter clothes. Brandon's mom. Books? My tools were in a pile in the corner. Not organized, not stored carefully. Piled. The Japanese hand plane was on the bottom. Piled. I could see the corner of its blade, touching the concrete floor. Wild. Piled. The roaring I felt then was not rage exactly. It was something older than rage. Something closer. To grief. I walked back to the kitchen. Emma was still standing by the counter, waiting. My tools are in a pile on the floor. I said. We needed the space, she said. We were just going to put them in boxes. Those tools belonged to my father. She looked at the counter. I know, Dad. I'm sorry. Brandon's mom needed somewhere to put her things, and the workshop seemed like the most logical. This is my house, I said. My voice was low. I worked to keep it that way. Mine. I own this house. My name is on the deed. I pay the taxes. And I came home from your aunt's birthday party to find strangers sleeping in my house and my father's tools on the concrete floor. They're not strangers, she said. They're family. There is a particular kind of silence that happens when someone says something that reveals exactly how differently they see the world than you do. That was the silence I was standing in. I want them out, I said. I want everyone who is not you and Brandon out of my house by Sunday. Her face shifted. The managed expression slipped, just slightly, and underneath it I saw something I hadn't expected. Not guilt, determination, said. Dad, she said, we've already talked to a lawyer. If they've been here more than 3 days, there are residency considerations. You can't just make them leave. End quote. I looked at my daughter, who I had raised alone for 6 years after her mother died. My daughter who I had driven to every soccer practice and every school play and whose college tuition I had paid without complaint. She had talked to a lawyer. Where are my house keys? I said. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. I made copies for Renata and Frank, she said, so they could come and go. And you gave my house keys to someone else without asking me. You were away, she said. I picked up my jacket from the hook by the back door, the hook I had installed myself 17 years ago. I walked out. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a few minutes. I could see, through the windshield, the living room window, the blue light of that unfamiliar television, the silhouette of Renata not moving from the sectional. Then I noticed my neighbor across the street, Phil Garrett, standing on his porch. Phil is 73, retired postal worker, the kind of man who notices everything and says very little until it matters. He was watching my house. When he saw me in the truck, he walked down his porch steps and crossed the street. I rolled down the window. Ray, he said. He didn't say anything else for a moment. He just looked at my house. You saw all of this, I said. I did, he said. I've been watching it for 4 days. He rubbed the back of his neck. I wasn't sure whether to call you. And didn't want to ruin your sister's birthday. and, 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 what, and, and, what, and, what, 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 and, what. But Ray, there's something I need to tell you, and I've been sitting on it and I shouldn't be. Tell me, I said. He leaned against the truck door. 3 days ago, he said, the daughter-in-law came to me, not Emma, the other one, Brandon's sister, the young one, Kayla. Yeah. She came over and introduced herself real friendly and said they were all staying with you for a while you figured out some things. Said you were thinking about renting the place out short-term and you'd asked them to help manage it. Said they were going to use one of those apps, Airbnb. He paused. She asked if I knew any good professional photographers in the area. Said they needed someone to take pictures of the house for the listing. The words landed one at a time. She said I'd asked them to manage an Airbnb rental. That's what she said. Phil looked at me steadily. Ray, I've known you 16 years. You have never once mentioned renting this house. See, you have also never once mentioned moving to Florida, which is what Brandon's mother told my wife when she came over to introduce herself on Tuesday. The pieces were assembling themselves in my mind with the cold clarity of things that have been true for longer than you realized. I thanked Phil. I shook his hand. I drove straight to the Howard Johnson on the edge of town and I checked in for the night because I could not sleep in my house and I would not sleep in my truck. I lay on a hotel bed that smelled like industrial cleaner and I looked at the ceiling and I thought about my daughter saying they had talked to a lawyer and about Renata's eyes going back to the television and about Kayla asking Phil's wife if she knew a photographer. They were planning to rent my house on Airbnb, my house with Donna's yellow kitchen and the workbench I built from Schoolhouse Oak. They were going to take photographs of it and put it on the internet and collect money from strangers while I was standing in a Howard Johnson looking at a water stain on the ceiling. I called my own attorney the next morning. His name is Gerald Pruitt. He has been my attorney for 22 years. He handled Donna's estate. And he handled the refinancing when interest rates dropped in 2019. He knows my house the way a doctor knows a patient's file. I explained the situation. He was quiet for a long time when I finished. Ray, he said, the good news is that your name is the only name on the deed and the only name on the mortgage. The house is unambiguously yours. The bad news is that if they claim you gave verbal permission for them to stay, getting them removed becomes a process rather than an afternoon. That process can take weeks, sometimes months. If they will claim invitation, they may even claim you authorized the rental arrangement. What do I need? I asked. Evidence of fraud, he said simply. If they are representing themselves as managers or owners of your property to third parties, that is a criminal matter. That changes everything. Property dispute is civil. Fraud is criminal. Criminal means the police can move immediately. I told him about Kayla asking Phil's wife about the photographer. He was quiet again, briefer this time. Do you know if the listing ever went up? I didn't know, but I knew how to find out. I asked my nephew Dale, who is 29 and knows these apps the way I know my hand tools, to search Airbnb for my address. He called me back 40 minutes later. Uncle Ray, he said, there's a listing. It went up 2 days ago. It's under a name I don't recognize. Profile says something called Volunteer State Properties. But the photos are your house. That's Aunt Donna's kitchen. I recognize the yellow. I had him take a screenshot. I had him send it to me. I sat in the Howard Johnson parking lot and I looked at a photograph of my wife's yellow kitchen on a rental app, listed at $189 a night, managed by a profile that was not me. I called Gerald back. We have the listing, I said. Send it to me, he said. Then sit tight. What happened next took until Sunday afternoon, but it moved with the kind of precision that only happens when the law is unambiguously on your side. Gerald filed a fraud complaint with the Clarksville police. He attached the Airbnb listing, Phil's written statement, and my deed. He attached a screenshot Dale pulled of the listing's booking calendar, which showed 2 reservations already made for the following weekend. Someone had already paid to stay in my house, in Donna's room, and the detective who called me was named Howell. She was businesslike and thorough, and she asked clear questions, and I gave her clear answers. She asked if I had any documentation of the tools being removed from the workshop. I told her I had taken photographs on my phone the night I arrived. She asked me to send them. Sunday at 2 in the afternoon, I pulled up to my house for the second time that week. This time I was not alone. Detective Howell and a uniformed officer named Torres were with me. The front door was closed this time. I knocked. Brandon answered. He is 34, 6 feet, and at that moment he looked considerably smaller than usual. His face went through several expressions very quickly when he saw Detective Howell's badge. "We have a complaint to follow up on regarding this property," she said. "May we come in?" He stepped aside. The living room was the same. The enormous beige sectional, the unfamiliar television, Renata's reading glasses on the arm of the sofa. Renata herself appeared from the hallway, followed by Frank, Brandon's father, a quiet man I had met twice at family dinners. Frank took one look at the uniforms and went pale. Kayla came out of the kitchen. She was the youngest, 23, and she had more confidence than the situation warranted right up until the moment Detective Howell said her name. "You're Kayla Marsh?" Howell said. "Yes," Kayla said. "Are you associated with an Airbnb account under the name Volunteer State Properties?" The confidence left Kayla's face like air leaving a balloon. Emma came down the stairs. She saw me. She saw the detective. She stopped on the 4th step and held the banister. "Dad," she said. "Emma," I said. I kept my voice even. I had practiced keeping my voice even for 2 days. "This has gotten out of hand," she said. "This isn't what it looks like." "What does it look like?" I asked. She looked at Brandon. Brandon looked at his shoes. "Brandon." Detective Howell explained to the room that they were investigating a complaint of fraud related to the unauthorized listing of a residential property. She explained that representing oneself as the manager or owner of property belonging to another person, for the purpose of collecting rental income, constitutes fraud under Tennessee law. She explained this calmly, without drama, in the tone of a woman who has said these words before. Renata said, "We didn't know." Frank said, "Kayla handled all of that." Kayla said nothing. She was looking at a spot on the floor. Emma said, "She did it to help. We were trying to help. She listed my house on a rental app," I said, "under a fake company name, and collected deposits from 2 guests who believe they are staying here next weekend. That is not help. That is fraud." The word sat in the room. Detective Howell asked Kayla to come with her to the station for questioning. Kayla started to cry, the kind of crying that is more about being caught than about being sorry. Brandon tried to say something and Howell held up a hand, not unkindly, and he stopped. Renata asked where they were supposed to go. I had thought about how to answer that question because I knew it was coming. "That is something you will need to figure out," I said. "You have until 6 o'clock this evening to remove your belongings. I will not be calling anyone else if you are gone by 6. It's—" Frank nodded. Frank, at least, understood the situation clearly. I walked down the hall to the workshop while they packed. I opened the door and I crouched down next to the pile of my tools in the corner. I lifted the Japanese hand plane off the concrete floor, and I turned it over and checked the blade. It was scratched along the body. And, not badly, but the scratch was there. I set it carefully on the workbench. I would fix what could be fixed. I stayed in the workshop while the sounds of packing moved through the house above me. I could hear Renata and Frank carrying boxes. I could hear Brandon's voice, low and tense. I did not hear, Emma. At 5:45, I walked through the house. The beige sectional was gone. The unfamiliar television was gone. My leather armchair was back in its place, though turned at the wrong angle. The kitchen still had the mismatched mugs in my cabinet, and I took them out and set them by the door. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table. Just sitting. Brandon was not in the room. I sat down across from her. "I need you to help me understand," I said. "How we got here." She was quiet for a long time. She had her hands flat on the table the way she used to do as a little girl when she was trying not to cry. Brandon's family had nowhere to go, she said finally, and we couldn't afford to help them financially. Kayla had this idea about the Airbnb. She said if they stayed here and managed rentals while you were traveling, they could save money and we could give you a cut and everyone would benefit. She paused. I knew it was wrong. I knew I should have called you. But Brandon was so stressed and I thought. She stopped. You thought I would say no, I said. I thought you would say no, she said. I would have said no, I said. She nodded. Emma, I said. This house is not a resource I failed to distribute properly. It is not a financial asset someone forgot to leverage. This is where your mother picked out the kitchen color. This is where her garden is. I carried her out of this house in a hospice stretcher and I came home to a house that smelled like her, and I have spent 4 years being grateful for that. And you let someone list it on the internet for $189 a night. She was crying by the time I finished. Not Kayla's caught in the act crying. Real crying. Not Kayla's. Not Kayla's. Not Kayla's. I know, she said. Dad, I know. I know you know, I said. We sat there for a while. I did not ask her to leave. She and Brandon were not part of the fraud complaint, not directly. And she was still my daughter. And she is not, but I told her clearly and without anger that this house was my house, that no decision about it would ever again be made without my knowledge, and that if that arrangement did not suit her or her husband, I needed to know that now. She said she understood. She said she was sorry, and it was the right kind of sorry, the kind that doesn't ask for anything back. Brandon came in to say he was sorry too. He was sincere, I think, in the way a man is sincere when he has seen exactly how badly a situation can go and genuinely doesn't want it to go that way again. I shook his hand. I am not a man who holds grudges easily, but I told him that his family's problems were his to solve, and that solving them at my expense was not something I would tolerate a second time. He nodded and looked at his wife, and they left together. Kayla was charged with fraud and with impersonating a property manager. Gerald told me later that the DA reduced the charge in exchange for restitution to the 2 guests who had already paid deposits and for 60 hours of community service. She was given probation. She was not allowed to operate any property rental accounts in Tennessee for 3 years. It was not the harshest outcome possible, but it was real, and it was public record. The 2 guests were refunded. I called them myself because Gerald said I didn't have to, but I wanted to. One was a family from Ohio, a couple and their 2 kids planning a weekend trip. The mother was embarrassed on my behalf. I told her she had nothing to be embarrassed about. I told her I was sorry for the confusion and that the house was not available and I hoped they found somewhere wonderful to stay. She thanked me and I meant it. Phil from across the street came over the following Monday with a casserole. His wife makes a chicken and rice dish that Donna used to trade recipes with her over the fence. I ate it standing up at the kitchen counter with the yellow walls around me and the evening light coming through the window above the sink, and I felt something I had not felt in 2 weeks, which was simply like myself. I spent the next 2 weekends putting the workshop back together. I rehung every tool on its proper hook. The chisels that had belonged to my father. The router table. The Japanese hand plane, with its new scratch along the body, hanging in its place. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive the scratch, but the plane still works. The blade is true. That matters more than the body. Emma calls every Sunday now, which she didn't always before. The calls are careful, a little formal still, the way a relationship is when it is healing from a real wound rather than a misunderstanding. I don't mind careful. Careful means she is paying attention. There is a thing that happens when you are past 60 and you have lost someone you built your life beside. You understand the weight of a place in a way that younger people haven't had to yet. Every scratch on the wall is a date. Every drawer that sticks is a story. When someone treats those things as incidental, as backdrop, as financial opportunity, it is not just an insult, it is a kind of forgetting. And forgetting is the one thing I cannot afford. I sit on the back porch some evenings now, the way I did when Donna was alive, and I look at the garden she planted. The roses she put in along the south fence, the herb bed by the steps, The Japanese maple in the corner that she called her favorite mistake because she'd planted it too close to the fence, and every year it leaned a little more toward the neighbor's yard as if it had somewhere better to be. I look at all of it and I feel what I always feel, which is that I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Nobody is taking that from me. Not for $189 a night. Not for any price. You do not always get to keep the people you love, but you fight like hell to keep the places where you loved them. And if anyone tries to take that from you, friend, you stand your ground. And, friend, 2007, you get your proof, you call the right people, and you stand your ground. That is the only way through.